Started getting emails from a fellow down in Binghamton, Darren Schmidt. I wasn't sure who he was, but he had interesting observations about some of the things I was saying in my show, and I think he may have been commenting occasionally on things I wrote in the New York Post. And I come to learn that Darren Schmidt is a probation officer down in Broome County. He's also a adjunct instructor in criminal justice at Broome County Community College. And he and Eric Campbell, who he had met some 15 years ago, have a very unusual relationship, and they've taken it on the road. Eric Campbell, as a very young man, was convicted of a very serious crime. I think it was second-degree murder. He served his time. He was in several juvenile facilities, but he's now an ex-offender, and he's gotten out of a life of crime, and he's involved in respectable work down in New York City, as well as being on the road and talking to young people and others about his own experiences. Eric Campbell and Darren Schmidt are here in Albany today for a meeting of it's the annual meeting of the Conference of Youth Bureaus. These are youth bureaus, I guess, from around the state.
Correct.
And these two gentlemen will be speaking there. And let me, without further ado, introduce them both. Darren Schmidt, good morning. Thank you for being with us. Eric Campbell, good morning. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Darren, you're the probation officer down in Broome County. Why don't you talk to us first, if you would, about how you developed this relationship with Eric Campbell some 15 years ago, I guess it was, right?
That's correct. Eric and I met probably 15 years ago, yeah. I was just out of college working at a DFY facility, and Eric had just been sentenced.
The New York State Division for Youth, right?
New York State Division for Youth, right. And I met Eric there, and I knew right away that he had really good skills, personal skills, and I felt myself right away questioning, how did this kid, and he was a kid at the time, end up in this situation? And since that time, we've kept in touch via email and mail, and last semester I brought Eric to campus at Broome Community College, and they had a great positive response from all the students and the teachers, and we said to ourselves, seems like people really enjoy listening to us, and let's try this on the road. And last week was really our first one.
Yes. Really? Yeah. Where did you appear last week?
Lake Placid.
Lake Placid,
yeah.
It
and what organization were you?
Criminal Justice Educators of New York State. And we said to ourselves, this is great. We really enjoy it. People are listening to us. They're excited about what we're saying. And they're really understanding our message. And it's that, you know, we met in a strange situation, but since that time we've had a good relationship, and we're both working towards speaking to kids and even other criminal justice educators about what we've been through.
Darren, where are you from originally? Are you from the southern tier?
I moved to the Binghamton area in the mid-'80s.
Okay. And how long have you been a probation officer?
12 years.
Okay. And what kinds of, what sort of caseload do you carry now?
Fairly high caseload, between 75 and 100 cases that I see. Yeah.
Eric Campbell, tell us, if you would, a little bit about yourself. Where are you from originally?
I'm originally from Brooklyn.
Okay.
In Bushwick. Me and Darren met, like we said, while I was incarcerated in.
What facility were you in?
McCormick Center, which is in Brooktondale, New York.
Right. And that's in the southern tier near Binghamton?
Tompkins.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we met at a very strange point, I guess, in both our lives. Me being incarcerated at the age of 15, I was sentenced to 7 years to life. And at that stage, you know, I was still in the development of who I am, as well as...
To say the least. I mean, a 15-year-old's really a kid.
Yes, yes. And you really don't understand life as a whole, more or less the situation I was in. And this is when I actually bumped into Darren during that time. And at the time in the facility, they paired you up with staff members as, as mentors. And he was my mentor. And we would sit down and go over different things like moral reasoning. And from that point, we developed a relationship on that standpoint until I was 21, which he actually left the job before then. But when you turn 21, they transfer you over into the States.
Right. When did you finally get out of prison?
3 years ago, actually. I was 28 years old when I was released.
Right.
I went to 4 parole boards, and I made my 4th one.
You know, recently, and I'm sure you've heard about it or maybe even followed it closely, there's been a lot of controversy about DFY facilities and whether or not there's been abuses of, you're not supposed to call them inmates, residents of the facilities, yes, or whether, in fact, maybe some of the facility employees are getting abused by the residents, and that's what the union has charged. In your experience, and I don't want to dwell on it, but just in your experience with DFY facilities, did you consider them to be well-run or reasonably well-run? What did you think?
I think DFY facilities have a great platform for rehabilitation for juveniles, but I think they dropped the ball in a lot of different cases. For instance, during my time there, in the facility. We weren't allowed to look at magazines or newspapers.
Of any sort?
Not any sort, but we were really restricted, especially on the news and where we were actually placed. There were only like 4 channels. So not only were we isolated, but then we kind of were blocked off to the world. So we would just basically brew in our frustrations, and then it causes a conflict on both ends with the staff members and the residents. It becomes a conflict, and it's never pretty.
I'm sure. Eric, what do you do now? You
I actually manage a store in Far Rockaway, Queens,
Right.
and I'm an independent and up-and-coming songwriter.
Right.
I've did placement songs for Kelly Clarkson, Avril Lavigne, and that sort. And I'm also taking this on the
Congratulations.
road as well.
Darren, were you going to say something about DFY facilities and talk
was
about your experience
I was
with
just
them?
going to say that it is a difficult job. You have kids there who want to learn, kids there who are there for minor things, and then you have kids there who are really just using it as a stepping stone to get to the Department of Corrections, and they're honing their skills, and they're getting sharp. And Eric and I both know, you know, if you looked at Eric on paper, you might think he was one of those kids, but he wasn't, and you learn that quick. But the kids that are on their way through the system are just kind of using that as a stopping point, and they aren't going to change, and it makes it hard to supervise them.
No, I don't doubt it. Let me ask you, I don't know who would like to go first, maybe you, Darren, since you're the parole officer, and I guess you probably, your credentials help put this together. If you could talk about what it is you say at these meetings, what's the pitch that you're making? You got this unique road show. What's it about? What's the message you're sending?
It is unique, and actually we're still developing it each time we go. We really liked our initial presentation, and we enjoyed it so much we said, let's find places to go, and we'll make our presentation for them. Last week we were at other criminal justice educators, so we spent a lot of time talking about what I see, what we do, what community college students would like to learn. And there were some students in the audience who really expressed some interest in us.
Online, I saw there's at least one story about, I guess, a recent appearance. Maybe was it last fall in Binghamton area?
That was
There's
when
a-
Eric came.
That's
I
when
saw
I
the-
came up.
Yeah, there's a photograph of you guys before. A pretty looked like a large audience at
It was.
the campus.
We
was.
jam-packed a small little room at
Yeah.
BCC. And then today, Eric's going to do a lot about some of the youth decisions and what students can think about and what they can do when you're dealing with youth, you know, as a probation officer, parole, as any authority figure trying to help out youth.
Maybe I then ask Eric, in terms of the lessons, I mean, you had a very tough experience, and you've gotten through it. Congratulations, by the way. It looks like tremendously for the
Thank
better.
you.
What is it that you tell young people? I mean, you're not speaking to an audience when you go to these sessions that's from the community, I assume, that you came from. This is
Yes.
more of an academic audience and professional audience. What are some of the things that make up the message that you deliver?
What helps both of us is how unique the story is on both ends of the aspect of him being, as you say, a staff member and me being a resident. And I try to relay my message as being having the opportunity to go through a situation like that and still be understood by another person to express who I can be today. So what I try to express through all my presentations, whether I'm speaking to youth in my neighborhood or at these conferences with teachers and students, is just like the journey of your life, how, you know, the roads may take terrible turns, but you still have the opportunity. If you still hold tight to it, you still have the opportunity to make something out of it. I mean, like I tell kids all the time, going to 4 parole boards, it could have been easy for me to say, forget this, and succumb to that aspect of prison life. But you could still prevail.
By that you mean you could have easily given up, but you
Yes,
didn't. You kept
yes,
going back
kept-
to the parole boards to make your case for release.
Yes.
Were you going to school at all when you were in prison?
Yeah, I took courses at TC3 for sociology and criminology. Any program that they had, from teacher's aid, nurse aid, facilitating and anger aggression, drafting, teacher's aid. I tried to enroll in anything possible that I could gain any insight or even keep busy at that point, because some
Right.
things that I enrolled in that I really didn't like at first, but there's things that you can take from it and utilize it in your life personally.
Sure. Darren, from what you've seen at DFY facilities and now as a probation officer, which is distinguished from a parole officer, you're dealing with people they're younger, I assume, they haven't yet gone to prison.
Right.
They're given a break, and so they're on probation as opposed to being on parole, which is
Correct.
when you get out of prison. From what you've seen, though, how unique is Eric's story? I mean, it seems to me a lot of people who are familiar with the criminal justice system would probably say there's no more than 10 or 20% of people who wind up in the system who are like Eric, who have that kind of motivation and the intelligence and whatever else it may be. What do you think, and what do you say in response to a question like that?
It is unique, especially, Eric didn't even get probation. He went right to incarceration. And the folks I deal with have probation, which is an extra opportunity to avoid long-term incarceration. But these qualities are Eric's, and these are the qualities I saw in him when I met him. And it is maybe 10 to 20%. And Eric and I talk a lot about, we can, in our mind, go down the hallway of our unit. The bathroom's on the right, and we can each remember where each kid was. And I can't think of anybody else that I've met that I would go to bat for and say, this is a great person. They may all be good people, but they weren't in the right frame of mind to change their life.
Eric, what do you say about a question like the one I just asked Darren, in terms of you know a lot of these people. You were in facilities with them. You come out of a community that produces a disproportionately high number of people involved in criminal activity, yet you were able to overcome it. What do you think, what do you possess that maybe a lot of the others don't?
I think at that time in my life, I took a lot of the hardship, and I tell a lot of people, anger, you could utilize it wrongly. And I think at that age, especially with juveniles, not knowing how to direct their anger, utilized it wrong. And I use it to motivate me into doing things, being athletic or going into school and education.
Why don't others? I mean, I wonder, I've always thought that some of the reason that there's criminal behavior is because it can be fun. It can make a lot of money for you. It can if you're very smart and you want to get ahead very fast, crime can be an easy route for a while anyway to accomplish a lot. It takes more diligence and a sense of a continuum of life to take the time to put the effort into making something of yourself, developing the skills that you develop. There are some people, a lot of people involved in criminal activity, I think you'd agree, who want it now. They just want immediate gratification. Yeah. Why do you think you were able to discipline yourself in a way that so many others who were in prison with you or in the DFY facility with you aren't able to do?
I think it had to do a lot with dreaming. A lot of guys growing up in the environments that we grew up are desensitized to a lot of things. And they grow up thinking this is what we do. And that's it. They get stuck in that mentality. And being incarcerated and being stripped away, for me personally, all I had was dreaming. And I would dream about these things. I would fantasize. I would game plan. I would want more than just what I had now. And that was the first time I experienced such a life, being stripped of family, friends, the freedom to go to and fro. So that just gave me that will to want more.
What's the sense that both of you have now as to the direction of things going in the state in terms of the criminal justice system, in terms of maybe the economy? You're from the southern tier, Darren. You know the great economic difficulties down there.
I do.
And Eric, in New York City, there's still a great deal of crime, and a lot of communities have done better, but there's still a great deal of poverty in various areas. Let me ask you first, as a probation officer, Darren, what's your sense of how the criminal justice system is functioning?
I'm very impressed by some of the reforms that Governor Cuomo has initiated regarding juvenile detention.
The DFY actions.
The OCFS has looked at some of their detention models and has made it not commonplace for juveniles to be incarcerated so fast. And I think that's a good step. I think maybe more use of probation, more use of other community resources would help, because once you get into an environment where you're surrounded by kids who are headed towards corrections, and they know that, then it's really hard to pull them out of it. And the resources at these OCFS facilities are getting better, but when we were there, and it is 15 years ago, weren't equipped to, other than to do a one-way form of communication for training, to really help the kids turn around.
Just as a follow-up, Darren, you work for the county, right?
Yes.
Is that right? You're the county probation officer dealing with local offenses generally, right. Misdemeanor offenses, is that right?
Misdemeanor and felonies, yeah.
And some felonies. What are the principal crimes in your area that people are being convicted of, and is there any sort of trend or uniqueness in that area that's different from other places?
I think Broome County has seen its share of drug influx, whether
Talking about methamphetamines?
Mostly heroin.
Heroin.
Whether it's drug trafficking or drug sales. And we have our fair share of grand larcenies, of petty thefts, some burglaries. But overall, I think the system, from where I can see, is functioning fairly well.
Eric, down in New York City where you are, what's your sense of how things are going in the community, the direction of the business community, as well as people maybe from your old neighborhood who you may still encounter who are involved in criminal activity? Are things getting better? Or you think things are getting worse?
On one scale, it's getting better. On the other, it's not. One thing that I do admire is that a lot of the youth and younger adults are getting more politically aware, and I think this is a good climate for that. Before, kids are growing up like, I don't care about voting. I don't care about being involved in that. Now you hear guys having conversations about what's going on with the economy and stuff. So that's good on that end. But as always, crime still brews in some areas in life. And I think that the job atmosphere in there, especially for guys who have been incarcerated, is extremely hard.
Sure.
And among people who have all types of degrees are still having difficulties with employment, and with that in that environment still brews the opportunity and idea to invest time in criminal activity.
What's the main criminal activity, would you think, in your area, your neighborhoods? Drug trafficking, would you think? Or
Most likely drug trafficking. As far as gun violence and physical violence in
Yeah.
that aspect has went down a lot in the
That's good.
neighborhood, but I think drugs is still high.
Listener wonders, where did you get the curiosity to want to learn? It's a wonderful thing, Eric, and I agree. But do you have any idea where it came from? Was it from your family, your mother, your father, perhaps?
In my household, my mother was very big on knowing or giving out information. And as a kid, even growing up in that neighborhood, we tend to gravitate to the wrong things. But then when you actually stuck with yourself, and you don't have any influences, whether it's TV, parents, friends, or anything, then your own curiosity starts to expand. And I guess that's what happened to me.
Darren, not only as a probation officer, but from more importantly for the question I'm about to ask, I would note that you're an instructor in criminal justice. Is there anything new under the sun to be learned about the criminal justice system? I mean, it's been studied for generations. The motivations of people who get involved in crime, the sociological profile is well known. It's always disproportionately poorer people. Is